Hi, everyone. This is Amanda Ray from Bright Talk. I'm introducing Velocify's 5 easy steps to creating an account-based strategy. And the presenter is going to be Thomas Cox. He is Director of Sales Operations at Velocify. Before he begins, please note we're going to be doing a Q&A at the end, so if you've got any questions, please ensure you click the Ask Audience Questions, and we'll make sure to answer it. Tom?
Awesome. Thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Bright Talk, for helping us set this up. And also thank you, everyone on the webinar. We're really excited to have everyone here and to share some of our best practices for launching an account-based sales strategy. And before we jump into the content, we wanted to first pose a question to you, the audience, to help us start thinking in that account-based mind frame. So, Amanda, can you post that question to the audience? So here is the question. So the question is, why are you interested in account-based selling? And so some of the feedback that we typically look for is either to increase revenue, to align sales and marketing better, to maybe take a more focused selling approach. Perhaps it was an executive mandate that they've instructed you and your organization to become more account-centric, or perhaps much like we've seen, people are beginning to talk more about it. You may see it more in the literature, in the blogs out there, or perhaps at some of these conferences. So we wanted to post that question and get your feedback. So it looks like we're just getting that question launched. Amanda, any chance it looks like the question may not be available yet? Great. So it looks like it's up. And the 2 early leaders, it looks like we're going to post this just for a minute or so. So if you can go ahead and cast your vote so we can get that feedback, would be fantastic. And it looks like the 2 early leaders are increasing revenue and taking a more focused approach. And these 2 results are very consistent from what we've seen in previous research and previous webinars. Obviously, the first being in sales and perhaps marketing, really focused on increasing our revenue is kind of the ultimate goal in back of everyone's mind. And then secondly, which I think really applies well to taking an account-based sales strategy approach, is about focus and focusing on your customers' personas and the customer's buying journey. And with that being said, we'll maybe give it just a few more seconds here, and then begin to move on. So I think we should be good with the intro audience poll. Thank you, everyone, for your feedback, and I think that's going to help us dive into the content. So before we jump in, I wanted to give a brief introduction to account-based selling. So I'm assuming most on this webinar are somewhat familiar with what the concept is all about. And the way we define it, it's really about aligning your sales and marketing teams around what matters most. And that's all about personally connecting with your buyers and ultimately having a deeper understanding of your buyers' goals and objectives and how your product or service can add value or alleviate a pain point. And we're really excited to dive into the content. Before we do so, some of the pieces that you'll gain from this webinar are one, tips for mapping out your ideal buyer persona and doing that in partnership if you're in sales with marketing. Secondly, getting ideas for personalized content and helping moving your buyer through that sales cycle faster. And then additionally, we'll cover towards the end, what are some of the key metrics to measure and ultimately optimize your approach and your sales strategy. So, with that being said, let's get started. So, the first step we recommend in terms of building this account-based approach, it's all about focus. And that kind of leads us back to the poll that we just conducted. One way to begin thinking in this account-centric framework, we recommend creating what we call a Dream 100. It doesn't necessarily have to be 100, but it could be 20, it could be 40, 50, but building a list of target customers and thinking about who would gain the most value from your products and starting there. And I think that will help at least kick off the process of this account-based selling strategy. So with that being said, we recommend starting at that really high level 10,000-foot view and then really zooming all the way down and into, in a very granular fashion, into those companies and looking at what are some of the characteristics of those companies that you may be able to find. And so some of the typical characteristics obviously are vertical based. It could be industry. It could be the size of the customer. But as you continue to dig deeper, it may be what other products that company uses. For us, one of our products, Pulse, we look at, do they have Salesforce as their CRM? Are they also using a marketing automation tool as an example? So what does that customer profile look for you? And some of the three key characteristics that we use to help define that company profile is starting one with the qualitative data. And qualitative meaning feedback ultimately from your customers in conversations, speaking with your customers directly. Obviously, your sales reps will have that qualitative piece. It could be your sales engineers who are also having those conversations. And we also recommend people who aren't necessarily customer-facing. So for myself in sales operations, even having your non-customer-facing folks go speak with 10, 20 customers and get that qualitative feedback. The second piece is quantitative and looking at perhaps historical win rates. So maybe one industry, you're having some great success, or a certain size, maybe it's in that mid-market segment that these customers are finding the most value. So taking a data-driven approach. And thirdly, this is one of the more emerging pieces of technology in this space, but using some kind of predictive scoring technology. So we also use a third-party application that uses machine learning algorithms to help score the top accounts. And so using a combination of those three, you can begin identifying which company profiles are the best fit for your product or service. Now, to add on to that piece, it's also super valuable to then dive in a level deeper to look at then the individuals and the individual personas associated with that company profile. And now that may vary from product and service to service, but some of the core personas that we see, especially in this account-based selling framework, where it's relatively more complex and you're going to have perhaps more people involved in closing that deal, we usually start with an influencer. So someone who interacts with the product or service the most or in a deep fashion. There's typically a champion, and so this is someone who is a champion of your product at that company, and that's typically your main point of contact, and someone who will help you shepherd the deal to close. Thirdly, we typically see some kind of detractor. It's someone who is a roadblock to closing that deal. So it may be, for example, someone in IT who isn't comfortable with your integration or perhaps has some security concerns. It could be someone in the finance team who is concerned about the price or budget that you have to overcome. So those types of things that we see in terms of the detractor. And then fourthly, there's a decision maker. And so this is someone who's going to be signing the contract, and perhaps if you have a service agreement that may be going through and redlining or requesting red lines, but you'll typically have a decision maker who will close the deal, and that may be a CEO or CFO or someone in the executive suite. So to come back to that point, it's understanding both the company profile as well as the buyer persona. So start there and begin mapping those two out. So the next piece, part two, is understanding not only who these companies are and who the people are, but also how do they buy and what is the buying process for that company and that sale. And you want to understand what makes each of those personas tick. How do they each think? So, for example, a sales leader may think differently than the CFO, or the IT leader may think differently than the HR leader. And understanding that level of the buying journey is really the second piece. And so how do you understand this? And what we recommend is starting with the status quo, meaning what are those companies and those personas, what are they doing today, and how are they getting along without your solution or your product? And really understanding what are the pain points and how can you or your product add value and alleviate some of that pain. And that's really a key part of understanding where they are today. And also, how are the different personas intertwined? And more specifically, not only how they're intertwined, but where and when do those personas surface in that buying journey, in that buying process? And here is an example of some buyer stages. Now again, this will vary based on your product and your services, but it's really about putting yourself in the shoes of your potential personas and trying to think through their varying thought processes and putting yourself in their state of mind. And again, doing this will help you understand more deeply that company profiles, buyer journey, and how those different personas are ultimately going to interact with each other. Now, the third piece, this is really important. So when we think back, we now have, you start with the company profile. You start then with the personas within those companies. You then understand very deeply the buyer's journey. Now, the third piece is about building your sales process that is deeply aligned to that buyer's journey. So again, it's really thinking customer and account centric, and then building and mapping your selling process to that journey. And what we're going to go through here shortly is how you then think about building different plays, content that's designed for each persona and each stage, with the ultimate goal of developing consensus with that potential prospect and within that company profile. And what you see here, this is you think of as a framework for designing a sales process. And let me walk you through how this really lays out, because I believe this framework, if you can take one thing away from this webinar, it would be taking away this sales process design framework, which is super valuable. So in the top section, we have what we just walked through, the buyer stages. So what is the buyer's journey? Putting yourself in their shoes. And even the language here is really buyer-centric, so problem identification, making a decision, comparing vendors. So really, how does the buyer view that buying process? And then what we recommend is then overlaying your internal sales process and the stages against that journey. So, for example, you may have qualification as that first stage in the sales process, ultimately to some kind of negotiation phase before you get that signature. Now, the second piece in the matrix is looking at the actions. And the actions are really about what is happening in each stage of the sales process. And most B2B companies that we've seen, you may have different individuals at your own company. So, for example, for us, we have an SDR team that qualifies. Then you have an AE who's then closing the deal. So really the point is what's happening at each stage of the sales process. Now, the second piece, or I should say the third piece, are the plays involved for each stage. And these are really strategic, they're preconceived, and they're targeted for that piece of the buying process. So you may have, for example, a case study that you send out, may have the contract phase. So understanding what are those plays, the demo phase. So what are those plays that you're executing in a repeatable fashion that you can coach your reps on. And then lastly, this is a super critical piece of designing and ultimately being able to measure very clearly your process, and we'll get to the measurement piece a little bit later, but what is the exit criteria? So what is the criteria and how do you define that so the deal can move into the next stage? So it may be a meeting happened or the buyer signed the contract or whatever that criteria may be, but it's important to clearly define that so that the team can move to the next stage, and then as sales management and the executive team can have a very clear view of where the deals sit and where the pipeline is. So super critical. So to move on kind of to the next piece, and before I do that, I did want to remind myself, and the reason I wanted to spend extra time on this section is we use this framework internally, and we can maybe go through if you guys have any questions later, but we use this framework, and we had ultimately a 2-day offsite with our COO, our head of marketing, sales. We also invited sales engineering to really get aligned as a company behind this account-based selling model. And so getting that alignment internally at your own companies is super critical when you think about launching this internally. So to move on, so now that we have our target buyers, target personas, we understand their buying process, we built the sales process against that buyer's journey. The fourth piece is about creating content and aligning it to the key personas and to the stages. And this, I think, ties in well to the plays piece from the sales, designing the sales process, that framework. And it's about, the way I think about it is it's about delivering the right content to the right persona at the right time of the buying journey. And really to think about this, it's having custom tailored engagement based on each unique situation that speaks to the personas. And this is really critical, having this built out. And again, this comes back to that alignment piece of internal alignment of having sales and marketing and perhaps other divisions as well ultimately aligned to optimize and ensure that you're delivering according to the buyer's journey. An example that I like to think about is kind of outside the selling example or outside the selling world. But I think of Amazon, and I think of, I'm sure many of you have used Amazon. I'm a big Amazon Prime user. And you think about the suggested content. So when you're looking at one product, they will then suggest, based on purchase history, they've bought another product. So for example, I'm on there buying, I have a 2-year-old, I'm buying Honest diapers. They're going to obviously recommend Honest wipes. If you have 2-year-olds, you know that. But they may also recommend, say, Honest baby soap. So the example there that I'm trying to call out is really having that designed for that persona, where they are, and that's ultimately going to gain value. And we'll go through some more targeted examples. So again, referencing back to the buyer's journey, and depending on the buyer's stage, where they are in the sales process, you then can see where are the personas involved. So early on, you may have a VP of sales or a director of sales development that you're trying to sell your solution to, and you may provide case studies. And the case studies may be targeted to their industry, directed specifically for their persona. Then later in the deal, you may have a sales operations professional involved, and they want to see some technical documentation. They want to see how it integrates, and you're able to deliver that specific content there. And then perhaps later in the deal, the CFO, he wants to look at some of the hard numbers, and so you provide him with an ROI calculator that's very numbers based, and that will provide that kind of rigor and analytical rigor that his persona is looking for. So again, it's having that custom tailored content aligned to the process, ultimately to the journey and to the persona, where we see the most amount of value in terms of launching this account-based sales strategy model. And then lastly, the fifth piece is all about measuring, learning from what you've developed, and then continuing to optimize it. And the phrase we like to use is inspect what you expect. And so some of the research, as you can see, companies that have a guided selling and account-based model that companies aligned upon, it leads to more revenue. It leads to a reduction in sales cycle time. So really creating more consistency, building that repeatable process, and ultimately that's metrics and data driven is super valuable. And then obviously having the tools and the technology to support this kind of framework. Obviously, that's where our software comes in, and other software as well. But being able to build this out for your organization is super valuable. And then in addition, when we think about kind of which metrics mean the most to us when we think of this account-based sales strategy, the first is all about sales activity. And the phrase that I like to use is event-driven data. And so this would be, what are your reps doing to either prospect these accounts, work the deals with these accounts? What is the rigor? How many calls? How many touches? And really ensuring that each account is being worked properly. So starting with activity. The next is, I would think about this as conversion. And so really understanding where deals are getting stuck in that process. And so when you end up developing this account-based model, you're able to understand not just kind of from beginning to end what was the conversion, but really becoming more granular and understanding where exactly in the process are you doing well, or you potentially could improve. And so looking at that stage-by-stage conversion and really understanding what is another way to say it is, what is the shape of your funnel, right? So you've seen some really interesting things there. And that ties in nicely to the last piece, is getting kind of to that rep level engagement. So measuring each of your reps, and we have kind of a scorecard-based approach, but really understanding how each of your reps are doing, how can they improve, and also tying it back to these other metrics. And ultimately, it comes down to how they're selling. So those are the three that we really like to zoom in on and focus on. So with that being said, to wrap things up, so the 5 easy steps, and again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out. We'll have Q&A right after this, or reach me via email. But the 5 easy steps, again, are understanding who are your target companies, and what does that look like for you. Then understanding within those companies, what are the key personas? And we walk through some of the standard ones that we use in terms of the champion, influencer, detractor, decision maker, but you may have your own unique set of personas, and building those out and understanding that. The third piece is then understanding the customer journey and building and designing your sales process around that customer journey, and then using that framework that we walk through with the stages, with the actions, plays, and exit criteria, and getting internal alignment around that framework with your sales, marketing, and whomever else that may be involved is super critical. And then the fourth piece is building content, right? So building that targeted content, again, for each persona at the right stage, at the right time, delivering that content. And then lastly, making sure you inspect what you expect. So optimizing, measuring, learning, iterating, continue to improve that process going forward. So with that being said, thank you for walking through that. Now I'm going to kick it off to Amanda, and Amanda's going to help us lead some Q&A.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for listening. We have a few questions coming in, and please feel free to continue to ask questions. The first question, Tom, I have for you is, getting sales and marketing to align on this framework is key. How do you suggest doing so?
You know, that's a great question, Amanda. And we covered, I think, briefly some of the pieces throughout the presentation, but to really come back to those, it's selling internally, right? Your internal company persona, so understanding who needs to be aligned, who needs to be involved. Again, for us, that worked really well was having an offsite, so getting outside of the office, focusing on this account-based framework, and getting some dedicated time behind it was super valuable for us.
Okay, great. Another question I have from the audience is, how many touches, i.e. calls, email, social, are recommended in the account-based selling approach?
Sure. So now this is ultimately going to depend on your, to use our content earlier, your target customers and your personas, and ultimately kind of the complexity of your product or service. But based on some of the industry-leading research and some of the research we've done here at Velocify, we highly recommend, at the minimum, a 6-call strategy where you intermingle email, perhaps social, so maybe a LinkedIn component over. We recommend at least a 15 to 22-day cycle for those different personas. So that's what we recommend, and we have some research on our website. I think it's called the Ultimate Contact Strategy. If you are at all interested, we can follow up with that link. But we recommend that number of touches, and then of course making sure when those contacts, when you do get some traction, contacting them in a very quick fashion. So making sure that time to call is huge.
Great, thank you. And just so the audience knows, in the attachments and link section, we actually have a link to the site. So if you want to click and continue to go over what Tom discussed, you can. We have another great question that just came in. You've talked a lot about metrics here, but I tend to struggle with productivity versus reporting. How do you collect your metrics in a time-effective way?
That's a good question. So again, this kind of goes back to the tools, and it's important that you have the right technology to ultimately measure that activity. And so having the tools to measure number of calls, number of emails, number of touches, to ensure that level of rigor is huge. And then it kind of going back to the rep level engagement. Now, we recommend activity across the board, but it may depend on it. You may have some very senior AEs who are consistently above quota, so you may treat them differently in terms of activity than a brand new junior rep who you want to encourage even a higher level of activity. So that's kind of what I would recommend and what we've seen be successful.
Okay, great. And another question just came in. Thank you, everybody, for asking questions. Is there a way to manage the number of touches that happen, i.e., can a third-party tool autofill my calendar when I need to call someone for the sixth time or something equivalent?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I don't have the answer to the calendar exactly piece, the calendar automation, but somewhat of a plug for our own product. That's exactly what we do. So we develop kind of a prioritization engine that ensures each contact and account is worked appropriately and to the right level of cadence for each individual. So that's kind of how we do it. Is we drink our own champagne, and then the calendaring piece. I haven't seen that level of functionality, but I can follow up with you on that.
Great, thank you. And our last question that we see, so please, if you have any questions, continue to ask. This kind of plays onto the most recent question we had. What tools do you have to help stay on top of target accounts?
Sure, yeah, so again, we use our own tool, Velocify, to prioritize those accounts. Some other tools that we've used, I touched on this briefly, but in terms of using kind of a predictive scoring for your accounts, we used a tool called Sales Predict, which was helpful for us. Other, I think, valuable tools in terms of firmographic information, we're currently evaluating a tool called ZoomInfo, which is a paid service. There are other cheaper tools out there as well. Obviously, LinkedIn and LinkedIn Navigator are a very popular tool in this space. So those are some of the tools I have seen personally successful, and I would recommend checking out.
Okay, great. We don't have any additional questions from the audience. If anyone has anything else they'd like to add, please do so now so we can answer it accordingly. But is there any tools that you think you need to have, or is that what you just discussed? Is that cover kind of everything that you feel like people need to have in order to stay on top of their target accounts?
Yeah, so I think those are the core. I would say some of the other, and this is perhaps too obvious for this audience, but obviously having a CRM is in many ways the starting point. A marketing automation tool can be very, very valuable as well to understand the level of engagement that, are those personas interacting with content, how are they interacting with it? And then lastly, I would also mention, we were using DocuSign to automate some of the contracting processes, and we were just launching a tool called Octave. They just rebranded they were called Tinderbox. They rebranded to Octave. And so that's in terms of the content piece and being able to deliver custom content. And we integrate it directly into our own tool, so inside of Salesforce. So something of that nature can also be helpful when you think about the account-based view.
Okay, great. We actually just got another question that came in. And just to follow up on my question around collecting metrics effectively, are there any specific tools that allow my team to collect their metrics in an easy way?
Yeah. So EU's so the metrics piece, obviously, like I said, you want it to be event-driven is kind of the modern way to do it. So what that means is being able to so I guess we could say take an action, but in terms of, say, you sent an email, you want that to be automatically logged. Or if you, say, have your reps call someone, you want that to be automatically logged and that recording to automatically be logged in your system. So you don't want to have your reps having to log a task and say they did something, which is kind of the legacy way to do it. So again, we use our own tool to set all that up. The click to dial, click to email, all of that is tracked. In terms of like if you're looking for maybe just more like analytical horsepower, a tool that we enjoy here is a tool called Tableau, where you can do some more analytical lifting if you'd like. There are a number of other analytics tools, Looker, and those are kind of the ones I've seen, but I know there's a handful of others as well out there.
Okay, great. That seems to be all the questions we received from the audience. If you have any additional ones, please let us know. We'd love to answer before we end this presentation. Just want to quickly add that if you'd love to download this presentation, it's in the attachments and links. And if you'd like to visit Velocify's site, that's also in the attachments and links section. If you have any questions that were not answered, Tom and his team will follow up accordingly, and then this webinar will be available on demand shortly after. Thank you, Tom, for presenting this, and we've learned a lot, and we love all the great answers you gave for those questions.
Okay, and thank you, Amanda, and thank you to the audience for attending. So really enjoyed having you guys on.
Yeah, thank you. Have a great day, everybody.